Oh,
All right, session 3. So we are on Doctor's Opinion XXVIII. So we read last week, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontent unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, which is the allergy, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. And this is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. So then we went to page 30, where they described that mind that's not in reality. How did they describe it? What words did they use? Obsession. Delusion. Remember what delusion is? Persistent false psychotic belief. We looked up the word psychosis. You know, where you're not in a state of reality.
oh yeah, obsession.
And just because we stop drinking doesn't mean reality's coming back. That's why we go back to drinking. So the obsession is very different than the craving. The obsession is the mental part of this disease. The craving is the physical part. But the good news was, I had you write page 27 next to entire psychic change. There is a solution, unless we have that psychic change and we get that from God. Thank the Lord. He changes our thinking. But they're trying, we're not even on page 1, and they're trying to tell us that psychic change, they're leaning towards something spiritual that we can't do it by ourselves. So at this point in the book, whether you believe or you don't believe, we're all believers here. But, for people that don't believe when they come in, they're getting to the point right off the bat before page 1 that the remedy, the answer is going to be something spiritual. It has to be. So that's what that psychic change is. It's lying outside the sphere of physical science. All right, so this is new. On the other hand, and as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems of despair of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being required to follow a few simple rules. And those few simple rules we're gonna understand are those 12 steps. A rule is a great word. Principles of governing action. Rules are principles of governing action. So XXIX, Doctor's Opinion, second paragraph. Help him out, please.
I'm like, I'm XXIX. ID.
So rules are guides or principles of governing action.
That's one more right here, ain't it?
What is doomed?
Doomed. I put destruction or dead.
Condemned, failure, death, ruin is doomed. And without God, we're doomed. Without these 12 steps that show us how to live, we are doomed. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Inadequacy is insufficient. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. And the next sentence I have highlighted. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. So definitely highlight that. Telling me again, my human power is not going to get me sober. Self cannot fix self.
And how'd you define inadequacy?
Insufficient.
Insufficient.
Insufficient. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. So again, Silkworth's honesty, we talked about it last week. What's he admitting again here? Remember his credentials. He's an expert in alcoholism. And what's he admitting here? Doctors had made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Being an expert in alcoholism, he's telling the truth. He's saying most doctors can't help. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I've had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date. Now I would highlight this. So he took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then what happens when we drink? The phenomenon of craving at once became paramount. We already looked up paramount. What is it? Superior to all others. Superior to all others is paramount. To all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. So we took a drink, something big is coming. A lot of us have probably had this, some big event, a holiday, a get-together, whatever it is. It's coming the next day, so what do? We take a drink prior, and then what becomes paramount? That next drink. I can't stop. The allergies set off. And then, highlight this, these men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. So the craving, the physical allergy, once I take a drink, is beyond my mental control. That's what the normal drinker, the heavy drinker, the moderate drinker, they will never understand that at all. When I take the drink, that's a choice. After I take a drink, it's no longer a choice. I have to have it. The phenomenon of craving, the allergy, becomes paramount. There is no mental control over it once I start. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. What's that?
Suicide.
That's suicide. I would write suicide right next to that. The supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. I think a lot of people don't understand that a lot of alcoholics, they die sober. If you don't have a solution for that mind that we have when we're not drinking, the resentment, the irritable, the discontent, a lot of us, we take our own lives because we can't live that way. Go to any meeting and you'll hear and see all kinds of angry people in meetings, that are decades sober. There's a reason for that. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and is in much detail outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. And these next couple paragraphs I just wrote out to the side, types of drinkers. Silkworth is just kind of breaking down, his patients that he's received over the years. And he's, giving them titles. But I can relate to every single one that he's getting ready to talk about. There's the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There's the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. What is that? I heard it. Denial. I would write denial right next to that. I've taken this much time off so I can drink again. Delusion. Persistent, false, psychotic belief that I can drink like other people. There is a manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. This next paragraph, I would highlight the entire thing. I would bracket. Just bracket the whole paragraph. Hello. We are at the bottom of the doctor's opinion 30, Roman numeral 30.
Triple X.
All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. So again, can't stop. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. Entity is being or type. It has never been, remember, this is the doctor's opinion, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest, so as doctors, as experts of alcoholism, the only relief they have to suggest is entire abstinence. Stop drinking. That's their answer. And that's what we hear from everybody, family members, people that we've heard, friends. But you even go to doctors, psychologists, therapists. What is their ultimate answer? Stop drinking. But the power isn't in the booze itself. The power is in the obsession. That's the main part, and the book is going to call it the crux of the problem. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Has that changed today?
No.
They got a lot more drugs. They had a lot of drugs back then, but they have a lot more drugs now. Take this. But their ultimate answer is they know when they give us a prescription, if we don't stop drinking, we're doomed. Still the answer today. For doctors. We, thank God, have another answer that we found.
Yep.
What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological and mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink.
You know who that man is?
Henry
Henry P.
Yep, Henry P. And you can write that to the side. Hank P. or Henry P. He was one of the first 10 alcoholics, I believe. Very good friend of Bill Wilson, Hank P. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. Now remember, if you don't die from this disease, I wrote wet brain right next to brain injury, and that's what happens to alcoholics as well. Our brain just turns to mush.
I've seen people like that. It's
They're in wards. There's a place down in Pueblo that has, a ward for them.
wet brain.
Wet brain. Bad place to be. So Hank was at the point of that. I was at the point of that. But it recovered over time. And the next line you want to highlight, he accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but he was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. So he came back to visit Silkworth. Silkworth didn't even recognize who he was. That's how much his life had changed. Miracle. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, and this is Jim B. You can write that next to that. Next to diagnosis, Jim B.
And it's got a story on the back,
Yep,
page 219.
page 219 for Jim B. And then Hank, or Henry P., he was a part of the writing to the employers, which is in the first 164 pages. So this patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated that he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. We'll realize that willpower does not work at all. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great, we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even then that would have any effect. However, I have this highlighted. He did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he's a fine specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book. And though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. What's scoff? To ridicule, to mock. I did plenty of that before I entered the rooms. I did plenty of that after I entered the rooms. You know, I used to mock it. This ain't gonna work. Any questions on the doctor's opinion? There's a lot of information in there, isn't there?
Just in
We're on 2 weeks of it. And we're starting page 1 now, but I never read it. You know, when I had my book, I'd always go to page 1. You know, nothing before page 1 could be important. And it turns out doctor's opinion ties directly into step 1. And he talks about exactly what the disease is. The mental and the physical, and then he even touches a little bit on the solution, which is spiritual, God. All right, page 1, Bill's story. So his sobriety date, if you want to write it on the top, is 12/11/34. Coming up.
34.
34. And right below Bill's story, I wrote the disease progression. His story is going to describe thoroughly how this disease progresses when we're drinking and when we're not drinking. Okay, so Bill was a World War I veteran. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of a life at last, and in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. I have this highlighted. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning the drink. Anybody have it run in their family before they even started drinking and kind of knew what alcoholism was? Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, probably starting at 6 or 7 years old, I would just pour soda pop in a shot glass, and I would drink it. And I watched my dad, but I don't know why I did it. I know why now, but that's how I would love drinking soda pop out of a shot glass. I realized, later on why I was doing that. And even when, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, like I would have sips, my dad would give me like a sip of beer, or at holidays that I'd get a glass of wine. Immediately I would want more. Like my sister never drank anything, and when I would have my wine at Thanksgiving, I would go and take hers, and I never understood why, but it was an immediate reaction. So there were signs of alcoholism, before I drank, and even when I started drinking very little at a very young age. In time, we sailed for over there. Over there in quotes is World War I. Another, that's what they called it. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. So doggerel is another one of those words I would just pass up and have no idea what it means. So a doggerel is a verse that is loosely styled for comic effect.
Comic effect.
Verse that is loosely styled for comic effect. And here's what he saw on that tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is never forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. And pot they're referring to is it's what they drank alcohol with. And back then, a pot was like this. You've seen those big German steins. That's what they drank with. Called it a pot. Mug or a glass that they drank with back then. I have this highlighted. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. Ominous is threatening or foretelling evil. Threatening or foretelling evil. Threatening or foretelling evil. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation. Circle that word fancied. And as we're reading Bill's story, you're gonna see where his mentality was, where his ego was. But fancied is unreal or imagined in the mind. Do you remember on page 30 some of the simple words that we read, like idea? Imagined in the mind. Bill is going to start, you're going to see as he's going through life, he's imagining these things in his life that aren't in reality. Going back to what Dr. Silkworth said. So fancied means unreal or imagined. And I even wrote down can't differentiate the true from the false. My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I wrote ego right next to that. He thought himself his talent for leadership and he at the head of vast enterprises. And we're going to realize that our ego is not our amigo. Remember? I have a good friend that says that in the rooms. I took a law course and obtained employment as an investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. I have this highlighted. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. So again, I had you label this chapter the progression of the disease. He thinks of himself right here as a potential alcoholic. He's starting to fail his courses because of drinking, and it's getting the attention of his wife that it's disturbing her. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk. I said that a lot. Never left the bar stool when I said it, but that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. So I wrote delusion right next to that. And boy, we can do that, especially when we start drinking. All the stuff that we're going to do in life. Right? By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Maelstrom is a violent whirlpool. A violent whirlpool. So he's head first into the stock market world. He's a stockbroker. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. I have this highlighted. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So I wrote here, what he's doing here is pretty important. He's making a decision, like he's at the point where he knows he has a problem drinking, but he's still making a decision based on self. And I wrote that to the side. He's making a decision based on self to try to better himself, knowing it would probably cut him to ribbons down the road. So that's why he compares it to a boomerang. Ever have that thought in your mind before you pick up the blunt or you pick up the drink? This is probably a pretty bad decision, but I'm going to do it anyway, right?
No, it's usually after the first drink, and then you say it's a bad decision.
Yeah, but then
It's
the
too
phenomenon, it's too late. That's right.
late. The stinking thinking comes.
Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. 1920s, that's a lot of money back then. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s that year. So him and Lois are off and running on a motorcycle and sidecar, and he's making money. He's doing well. He's still drinking.
Living the life.
He is. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many tuned to the paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life. I highlighted that because we've all had good times with it. All of us, or else we wouldn't keep going back to it. So it's working for him there, so he thought. There was a loud talk in the jazz places uptown, everyone spending thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. Highlight this next sentence. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. So you see the progression. So what we read on page 2 was his drinking was not yet continuous. Where is it here on page 3? All day, every night. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. Remonstrance, vigorously objecting or opposing. Vigorously objecting or opposing. So his friends, it's not just his wife that is concerned now. Now his friends are looking at him like, what are you doing? Why are you drinking so much? And what was his answer for that? If you don't want to drink with me, I'll become a lone wolf. I did that quite a bit. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity, for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. So he was too drunk to have an affair, is basically what he's saying there. In 1929, I contracted gall fever. Right ego again, right next to this. This is awesome. Watch where Bill Wilson's ego has gone. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Does anybody know who Walter Hagen was? He was one of the greatest golfers of all time. He was like, back then, he was like the Tiger Woods back then. And Bill Wilson is saying here, he's gonna overtake Walter Hagen in golf. So that describes his ego. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I highlighted this. I began to be jittery in the morning. Moderate drinkers, even heavy drinkers, they may not ever experience being jittery in the morning. I mean, I would wake up like this. It would get into my legs where I couldn't even walk, but the shakes they become a part of it, where your body, that's your body craving the alcohol, or craving the weed, or craving whatever drug that you're on. When you start doing this, your body starts shaking uncontrollably. You're in the later stages. So those jitters are a part of, the withdrawal. That's what it is. It's alcohol withdrawal. Golf permitted drinking every day and every night. It was fun to carom around the exclusive course which I had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. Man, 1920s writing or 1930s writing is pretty crazy. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker was still clattered. I was staring at an inch of the tape which bore the inscription XYZ 32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished, and so were many of my friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. So, this, of course, this is the crash of the New York Stock Exchange. And literally, when he says that, you can see videos of people jumping off skyscrapers committing suicide when this happened. And he's a stockbroker, so he lost everything. Instead, it says, that disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. I would highlight that. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock, so what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. So you start drinking again, and this is how I'm going to plan to do it now. I don't care if I'm a stockbroker and it just crashed. I'm still going to, his ego was still in full effect. Next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I'd better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. So what's he doing? Change of environment. He goes to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time, we stayed broke. So Bill would get functional to a point, change his environment, that's what he did here, and then what would inevitably happen? He got fired, he got let go, lost his job, drinking took over. He's trying to keep up with a craving beyond his mental control. And, most all of us get to that point, where you realize that, you get to the point where the alcohol or the drug, it stops working. You can't function anymore. I used to function while at work, while driving heavy equipment, operating backhoes right next to people's heads with a flask right in the side of my coat. I was still functioning, but then you get to the point where you can't do that anymore. You start drinking, and then, you could go 8 to 10 hours, and then you can't go an hour, and you're passed out, or, it gets bad. And yeah. We went to live with my parents. I found a job, then lost it as the result of a brawl with a taxi driver. You see the progression? Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in department stores, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. So he is now unemployed, and Lois, his wife, is working couple jobs just trying to pay the bills. She comes home after a hard day's work, and he's passed out drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places, so he became a sponge. This is one of the most important paragraphs in Bill's story. And I had to understand this, and it's something a lot of us, it's hard for us to understand this or recognize it because of our ego. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Did anybody get to that point where it wasn't having fun anymore? It was, I have to have it. It becomes like medicine. It doesn't become, well, I just want to do this every now and then to have fun. It's, I have to have this to function. Bathtub gin. You guys know what bathtub gin was back in the 1920s and 30s? They cleaned their bathtub with it. That's how much alcohol was in it. 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be a routine. So that's what he's drinking every day. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. So he's not calling them jitters anymore. He's not, a little shake here and there. He's shaking violently. I got to that point, and man, it is undescribable. A tumbler full of gin, followed by 6 bottles of beer, would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Anybody have to drink or use in order just to eat? Yeah. Here's the kicker. After all that, nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. And there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So in huge words, write denial. Next to that, write delusion. Because that's exactly what he's going through. And he doesn't know it. Remember, this is before AA, before sponsorship, before anything. This is Bill going through it by himself. He's shaking violently. He needs a couple tumblers of gin and 6 glasses of beer just to eat. But he still thinks he can control the situation. Most people don't get what delusion is and how powerful it is. Next sentence, gradually things got worse. That is a promise. Not all the promises in this book are good ones. That is an absolute promise. Especially once you realize you have a problem, every time you go back to that using the drugs or drinking, things will get worse. I'd always tell myself, there's no way it could get as bad as it was before. No, it does. And if it's not the places that I ended up, it was the mental deterioration of my mind. It got to the point, and I don't even know why I remember this. I couldn't even add 1 + 1. I didn't know what it was. Why I can remember that, I don't know, but I just remember struggling trying to figure out what 1 + 1 was when I was locked up in a mental institution. And that was like 3 days sober. So that's how bad it can get. And wet brain, the final part of that, you stay in that. So that's what alcoholics, especially during this time and before, that's what they had to look forward to. You either went insane, or you died. Usually both. Drugs, same thing. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits, so things are starting to look up again. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and the chance vanished. So prodigious is enormous. And what happened? He took a drink. Phenomenon of craving. And I would highlight these next couple sentences, underline them. This is a point in his life that's very important that we all get to the point. I woke up, this had to be stopped. Here it is. I saw I could not take so much as 1 drink. After all that he went through, he's still going through it, but he got to the point where it wasn't what the 12th one did, or the 15th, or the 20th. It's the first one. He knows what happens when he takes 1 drink. That's what the switch. Every excuse, every promise, every which way that it's going to be different this time is gone once you take that first drink. And I always have to know that. That's that 1 day at a time stuff, that I have to know what 1 drink does to me. It sets off that allergy. 1 smoke, 1 pill, whatever it is. If it's something that's going to alter my mind, no matter what it is, I'm going to keep doing it. That's what alcoholism is. I have that craving, I have that allergy in my body. So getting to that point is a good place to be. Is it going to keep you sober? Let's find out. I was through forever, but before then I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. So he knows. What's the next line? Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. So he knew without a doubt that the problem is 1 drink. So that gave him a celebration, call it that. Well, now that I know what my problem is, I just don't have to take that drink. And shortly home, he became drunk. So it wasn't the physical part that is the important part of this disease. We know what happens when we take it. The problem is, why do we take it? Silkworth touched on it. We have a mind that's not in reality, but Bill's really going to get into it. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? You can answer that yes. Because we did look up the word insanity. Are we crazy? When we're just not drinking and not relying on God or helping others or doing these steps that we're going to learn how to do, we are crazy. We have a serious, debilitating mental disorder. So was I crazy? Yes. I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed to being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. Here's a bad trait we can get into. You get sober for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. I got this. You're talking about that earlier today. And you see him in meetings. Oh man, I feel great. You know, they call it the pink cloud, and we'll get into that, but that's what he's talking about here. Confidence that he's sober. I could laugh at the gin meals. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to a telephone, and I would highlight the rest of this paragraph. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. I wrote down insanity right next to that. And for us, you know, that usually that confidence happens, that cocksureness he's talking about, when we stop going to meetings, you know, when we stop helping other people. Next line, you can write withdrawal right next to it. So after we get good and drunk in the late stages, this is talking about the next day. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. Does everybody remember that day? Day 1 of not drinking? Don't forget it. That's why we pass out these chips. That's why we always remember our sobriety date. When was my last drink? So we don't forget how bad it was and that it can get worse than that. So that's why we always want to know the last drink that we had. I remember it. Not good. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last, so to stop his shaking, dozen beers in the morning. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. And here's the thoughts that we get when we're going through it. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion.
Suicide.
Yep. But to battle those thoughts when you're going through what we're going through, it's just more drinking. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse, then the morning terror and madness were on me. Again I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. So what is he doing here? He's preparing to jump out of a window. So he's putting a mattress down below in case he does jump out the window. I mean, imagine the fear that he's going through. He can't stop, you know, and it's obviously not working for him at all, but he can't stop. He's drinking to survive, and that's what that drinking for necessity is. He's not drinking or using to have fun anymore. That stopped working a long time ago. He's drinking to stop what's going on in his head. He's contemplating suicide, and a lot of people get to that point, but instead of doing the suicide, he's drinking. But he's also preparing to die as he's putting a mattress down below. A doctor came in with a heavy sedative, so this is Bill doing drugs. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. That was my experience with it. They would give me all different kinds of pills, or I'd try this drug, you know. I'd smoke this weed, I'd do this pill, whatever it was, and I was drinking immediately. And, you know, whatever your choice of drug is, if you're drinking, you'll go back to that, you know, whatever your choice of drug is. Cocaine, LSD, heroin, whatever it is. Marijuana, whatever it is. You'll do both. You know, that's what he's saying. So, I mean, For anyone to say Bill never did drugs, he did plenty of drugs. He was drinking and using drugs. Later on in his life, sober, he was even using LSD. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity, so did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. I have these next couple paragraphs bracketed, and I'll tell you where to highlight, but it's all pretty important. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. So this is the first time he went to Towns Hospital under Dr. Silkworth. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Now that belladonna, that was a vicious drug. It comes from nightshade. So in order for Silkworth, and Silkworth did this to a lot of different patients because he had no other answer. They'd give them that belladonna treatment. Today they call it Ativan. I was on that. They had to feed me that stuff so I wouldn't go into a seizure. So back then, it hasn't. What I'm saying, it hasn't changed. So they had to give him more drugs to get off the alcohol. Today, they had to give me more drugs to get off the alcohol, and then you have to withdraw from those drugs. So it's painful. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I have this highlighted, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. Now this is important, because after everything that Bill had gone through, this is him being told for the first time by Dr. Silkworth that he was sick, that he had a mental illness with coupled with a physical illness. It's the first time he was told he was sick. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Highlight this. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. And you can write this on the top of this page. It's so important. He got to the point where, so the page before, he knows what 1 drink does, not 12. So he knows that. And now he's being explained by a doctor who specializes in alcoholism that he's mentally and physically sick. So, boom. As long as I know that, I can stay sober, right? Self-knowledge. Let's see what happens. But it was not. For the frightful day came home when I drank once more. We're going to go through 3 ways Bill tried to stop drinking, and most alcoholics try to stop drinking. The first is willpower. So we read the first, 5 pages of willpower and Bill failing. Now it's self-knowledge. Now we're at the point where Bill knows exactly what's going to happen when he drinks, but it's not enough. Just because I know I'm an alcoholic or a drug addict, that's not enough to keep me sober. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, the DTs, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. That's a promise. My wife got to that point. She knew that she couldn't help no matter how hard she tried, and basically she told me that she was planning my funeral daily. She knew I was going to die. But God. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. If you look up the word sot, it means habitual drunk. I want to see you guys introduce yourselves as a recovered sot.
Okay.
Recovered sock.
I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make an amends? But that was over now. Where's his mindset now? Self-pity. Do you see where each page is describing a different form of selfishness? He's in self-pity now. I'm done. I'm done. We do that. We do that to an extreme. And it's not putting anybody down when I call them selfish. It's a part of our condition. And it's one of the main parts that keeps us drinking and using. Selfishness and resentment are the two things that we're going to read about. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. Morass is a swamp, by the way, a swamp of self-pity. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Here's the third way that Bill tried to stop drinking, highlighted. Fear sobered me up a bit. So when you know willpower doesn't work and you know self-knowledge doesn't work, then you get to the point where you're scared to death. I would have panic attacks, anxiety every single day. I think I'm going to die every single day. And I was trying my best not to drink. Fear can sober you up for a little bit, but sooner or later you just go back to it. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. What's insanity again? If you don't have it written down, you write it here, the page before here, or on page 30, but exhibiting a serious, debilitating mental disorder. Exhibiting a serious, debilitating mental disorder. And on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch, and I would highlight the rest of this. Finally, some good news in Bill's story. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. I wonder how we got there. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. That's what it comes down to. It's not about what you're actually drinking. It's what supply you have in the house that'll keep you going. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing is reflecting or thinking. Reflecting or thinking is musing, was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. Italicized words, he was sober. So right above that, write Ebby Thatcher. E-B-B-Y, Thatcher, T-H-A-T-C-H-E-R. Without Ebby, Bill wouldn't have got sober. So Ebby was an important part of Bill's life. He was his drinking buddy. He grew up with him. And right there, Ebby was 2 months sober. So for anybody that tells you you need to be a year sober to help somebody is full of crap. Ebby is 2 months sober here at Bill's house trying to help him. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. What condition? He's sober. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Highlight this. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. So Ebby shows up sober. Where's Bill's mindset?
We can drink.
that we can drink again. So, unmindful of his welfare, Bill is in full-blown me mode, selfish mode. He doesn't even know it. But, he's glad to see Ebby, but all he's thinking about, now I can recapture these days. So just, think about his mindset as we're going through it. There was that time he had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. A jag is just a spree, a binge. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility, the very thing an oasis. Drinkers are like that. I like these next couple sentences. I have them highlighted. The door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? So that's an important little paragraph, and I wrote out next to it, watching a newcomer grow. Watching a newcomer grow. Fresh-skinned and glowing right at the end of the table. Right there. I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. He's like, I just pushed him a drink, and Ebby, who drinks with me all the time, is pushing it back. So he's like, what's going on? Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So aghast means, what is that? Struck with terror, amazement, or horror. Struck with terror, amazement, or horror. So remember, Bill, veteran of World War I, and we'll read more, but what he saw there, and a lot of people get into AA about either being mad at God, or not believing in God, or just not knowing of God. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I'm suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the boy was on fire all right. But bless his heart, that's a little sarcasm from Bill, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. So Ebby's talking about God, and Bill is not there, obviously, and he's getting irritated, but he's listening to him preach. He's listening to him rant, like he calls it, and he thinks his drinking is going to outlast his preaching. But then it says he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. I would highlight that. And those 2 men came from the Oxford groups, which was an early Christian organization. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass experience along to me, if I cared to have it. That's big. I would highlight that. So when we share experience, strength, and hope, it's not 100%, probably not even 50% that they're going to care to have it. I was shocked, but interested. So right above that, I would put open mind. He's shocked, but he is interested. He's not shutting Ebby down. And what's Ebby doing? He's talking about God. He's talking about these 2 people that came from this Christian organization that got him out of court and helped him. And he's 2 months sober now. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. I bracketed this next paragraph, and this is going to talk about Bill growing up and where he's at with God. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that pro-offered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. So he's remembering going to church with his grandfather, and he's remembering his grandfather say some things. You know, he likes some things that he heard, but he didn't like other things that he heard that the preacher was telling him. As most of us, you know, we can be like that. A lot of us, you know, don't like what the Bible says, but the Bible is what it is. So all these memories are popping up with Bill, and he's thinking about his grandfather taking him to church. The wartime day at Old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Most people aren't that come in here. Most people that say they are, 9 times out of 10, they're usually mad at God. They usually blame God for something that has nothing to do with God. So, few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. So you see where they're using the term spirit of the universe? And this is for, this is for agnostics, this is for atheists that, want nothing to do with God. There's some people that would come in here, and if they hear God, if they hear Jesus Christ, they'd walk right out the door. So the authors of the Big Book is trying to make it more open to people, where they can at least sit down and listen. Use words like spirit of the universe, And we'll get into that. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talk of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. But when you think of Jesus, that's what you think of. Personal relationship, right? Love. And his mind is snapping shut, usually because it's usually we get a bad representation of who Jesus was when we were growing up, or a misinterpretation of him. So, for anybody that says Christ is not in the Big Book, let's take a look at the top of page 11. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Has anything changed today with where his mindset is? That's probably way worse. So a lot of people like to take the good, think Jesus was a great prophet, he did good things, but I'm going to stop right there. Right? And then we get, all these other kinds of beliefs thrown in. But that's where Bill's at. He thinks Jesus he's not calling him God, he's calling him a man here. So he's not at the point of where he truly understands Christianity yet. He's at the point now where he doesn't realize the Oxford roots are Christian too. So he's at the point right here in the book where he's open-minded to believe he can't stop drinking. No human power can help him stop drinking. There has to be something spiritual that can help him stop. And he'll come to Christ. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery. Chicanery is trickery or deception. Trickery or deception. That religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. the brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, pay attention to these words that are capitalized. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. And this is the start of what a lot of people don't understand in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's only one God. Now, they're trying to, be careful here, and because they want to welcome everybody. So they're using other spiritual terms. But look what they have capitalized at the end of the sentence. Devil and boss universal. What do you usually hear in AA meetings? Well, it's spiritual. All things spiritual are good, right? No. Devil's capitalized here, and he's calling him the boss universal here. So, and you'll realize the cornerstone of Christianity, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the only way to the Father is through me. The first commandment is, thou shalt not put any other gods before me. If you're not worshiping God or believing in God, guess who you're worshiping?
So why is devil capitalized in here?
When we get here, and they'll also use another term, king alcohol. Who at this time, who are we, I don't want to say worship because I wasn't. In my experience, I always believed in God no matter what, and I never blamed him. But was I on that path? No. I was on the devil's path. I was on, and like I said, they capitalized the word king alcohol. Alcohol was my higher power. I wasn't turning to God, I was turning to alcohol. Even though I believed, I didn't have the faith that this mind, at the time, that this insane mind that I had, could be cured. I could recover from it. Didn't believe it. And then God showed me, when you start helping other people, all of a sudden miracles start happening with your mind. But Bill Wilson clearly is describing Christ right off the top, and he's describing the devil right at the end. So just, you hear everything spiritual is all good. It's not. There are, if it's not the one true God, guess what? It's the devil, the boss universal. So people just, you want to have an open mind, and if people come in and they're, and usually, like I said, it's usually because the way they were raised, they were given the wrong Jesus. They were given a religion. Religious people are the ones that got Jesus up on the cross. Pagans did too, but it was the Pharisees. It was the Jews. Jesus was a Jew. But, usually they get a bad representation of Christ, so they're mad at God. And they and they're confused about God and who is God. They're confused about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So, and AA, they do an overdose of spirituality. And we're going to talk about it. Bill Wilson gets into that overdose of spirituality. He comes to Christ, but then all of a sudden he comes to this belief that all spirituality is good. And he starts doing seances and all kinds of crazy stuff. And, he falls away from the path. He's a believer, which is good, but we don't want to get into that overdose of spirituality. That's not good. That's where Satan entered AA, God can restore us. Jesus Christ can restore us, the one true God. And he can do so many miracles in our lives. But if we start thinking that there is some other God, or gods, then you're looking at the devil, the boss universal. So this is a paragraph a lot of people don't talk about in AA. Christ is there in the big book, but so is the devil. And if it's not about Christ, then, the devil is the one that you're looking to. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And again, it's you don't want to force Jesus at somebody coming right out, coming into AA. And that's why you have to get to the point of what alcoholism is. Because like I said, I was a believer when I realized that the solution is God. I'm like, well, I'm done. Because I can't stop drinking. I didn't understand what alcoholism was. So when they, that's why the steps are in order for a reason. That's why step 1 is everything we read before page 1, and 43 pages describes, step 1 describes what alcoholism is. but they're slowly, in spurts, giving you an idea of spirituality, but you want to get to that point, where it's about Jesus. This program came from Christianity. Most people don't know that. Its history is rooted in Christianity. Okay. So yeah, definitely have those highlighted. Not all spirituality is good. In fact, most of it is far from good. Most of it is evil. But my friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. That's a promise. And the key for that promise to come true is what he just said above that. God had done for him what he could not do for himself. You see how early they're using the word God? They use Spirit of the universe right before that, and then right after that they use Christ. Then they used a bad spiritual entity in the devil, the Bosch Universal, and now they're going right to God, or he himself, Bill Wilson. And he's describing what happened to Ebby. Ebby was an atheist. Had this a power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and that was none at all. That floored me. And I would highlight this. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. That's a subtle direction. And again, that word is for the agnostic and the atheist who want nothing to do with religion. Back then in the 20s and 30s, religion is actually worse today than it was back then. When they're talking about religion back then, Jesus Christ is usually the most common aspect of religion back then. Today, religion's really bad because there's so much of it and you can get confused on who Jesus is. But, back then, religion was bad to the agnostic and the atheist. Now, as a Christian, I look at religion as being bad because I have a relationship with Jesus. So it's about, today it's about a relationship with Jesus. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. What's the definition of miracle?
Divine intervention of human affairs.
Divine intervention in human affairs. We're in a room full of miracles right now.
Yep.
Divine intervention in human affairs. Ebby couldn't cure himself, and Bill's calling him a miracle, and that definition of miracle is saying that God intervened. Anybody have an instance in their alcoholism where God intervened? I had several. He will intervene. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. And a vestige is a visible sign left by something lost. A visible sign left by something lost. So Bill thought that he had lost God because mainly of the war, but now he's in a spot right here where he's seeing Ebby sober. Ebby found God, and now all of a sudden God is coming back to Bill. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. Antipathy is feelings of intense dislike. Feelings of intense dislike. Just blows me away. The people that say that this program isn't about God, how many times have they used? We're on page 12.
Feelings of what?
Antipathy, feelings of intense dislike. Feelings of intense dislike, antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. So he's going through fear. But Ebby's telling him it's about the relationship with God. So now all of a sudden, something's taking a hold of him. I didn't like the idea, and you can highlight this. I could go for such conceptions, keyword conception, as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. So if someone comes in and they find out just in the meeting that the solution is God, they hear about Jesus and they get all mad, here's some, terms that can maybe help them come to be more willing. You don't want to, AA is it's open for everybody, and you don't want to force anything down anybody's throat. So if they don't like the word God, they're trying to use words here that are still not physical or human. They're spiritual terms. Spirit of nature, creative intelligence, universal mind. But the goal is, especially for Christians, that they get to that point and then find the one true God in recovery. That's the goal. It's not just about getting sober, it's about getting saved. That's the whole thing here.
Some people can't grasp that concept.
No, a lot of people can't. These terms can get you sober. Spirituality can get you sober. I've seen it happen, get you decades. But if you don't know Christ, you can end up dying sober with years of recovery and wind up in hell. We don't want that, We want to keep them coming back, and if the only way they can come back is using these spiritual terms that, get them keep coming back, but you also want to share who God is and that it's about that relationship with them. Can you openly share that in meetings today? It's getting harder and harder. You can talk about any God you want in an AA meeting, but you say the word Jesus Christ, and all of a sudden it raises, you see the tension in the room. And that's because he's the one true God.
That's why I say it.
Yep.
A lot of people.
Yep. I'll say it. I always will, But before, 4 years ago, I didn't, because, I didn't want to offend anybody. But Jesus Christ is going to offend people, and it's okay if it does. And if that, keeps someone out of the room, that's on them.
That's why they say open-minded.
Yeah. Open-minded about everything. You got to remember, Christianity, it has its roots in AA. AA was almost called what? The James Club, based on the book of James. So, we don't want to be, and, they broke away from the Oxford groups, as we're going to see, because the Oxford groups were, they did evangelism, to a pretty high level. You had to wear suits. You had to, they would force people to go to the altar and give their lives to Christ. Jesus doesn't want you to be forced to come to him. He wants you to come to him, freely, with an open mind, being willing and honest. So, and I'm finding as time goes on, the best way to share Christ in the rooms is by your actions, not by your words. I'll say his name. I'll never stop saying his name, but it's your actions that's going to make people want to know more. And that's what you want. You want people knowing more about God and who God is and the truth of who God is. These terms will keep them coming back, which is good. We want people coming back. It's about alcoholism. We want people to recover from alcoholism. So That's why step 2 doesn't start until page 43, 44. Stick to alcoholism, help, unless they get to the point that they understand that they're alcoholic and they understand what the physical, the mental, and the spiritual part is, they're going to keep drinking anyway. So, all right. So next week, top of page 12.